but there's still a delay. And so our brain doesn't know how to wait even 150 milliseconds. And as a result, it's got to almost consciously process the fact that when I'm saying something to you and you're not reacting in the absolute real time, my brain's got to process a little bit more.
This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 364, Zoom Fatigue, and what to do about it. An interview with Todd Caponi.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers, and I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm really tired. What am I tired about? Zoom calls. Had my fill of them. And now that spring is on the cusp, it's all the worse. That feeling's become all the more stronger. Read an article the other day written by Todd Caponi, a past guest who has been on Sales Babble, and he did a stellar job of digging into this issue. So I'm really excited to have him on the podcast. We had a terrific conversation, but the software that I'm using for recording did not do a great job on my side of the call. So it sounds a little muffled and a little bad. This is not the quality that you expect here on Sales Babble, so I apologize. So I really hope that you look at the quality of the content versus the quality of the sound. So in advance, my apologies. And so with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Todd. Are you ready to babble?
I am. I'm so excited to be back.
I'm excited to have you here. I went and looked, and it's been 3 years this June since you were a twice guest here on Sales Babble.
It's amazing. It was before the book, so I was just a little inkling of somebody with something interesting to talk about back then.
Yeah. The book that we talked about was the Transparency Sale, and it's a great book. It's actually about, I guess, how honesty is the path of building trust with buyers, because buyers are very skeptical. And that's the conversation we had.
Yep. That's right. And the book came out and it's doing well and it continues to do better and better. So I'm just out on the road. And by on the road, I mean sitting in my home office, staring at a little green dot next to the camera on my laptop, just spreading the good word.
Well, we're all in that boat too. Yep. When we did that interview, I was actually in your office down in the city.
That's right.
So yeah, you and I have not physically met since then. So
that's exactly right.
It's so great to have you here. I bumped into you by accident again on LinkedIn. A friend of mine, I don't remember who it was, had made a comment on a post that you did, and I was like, "Oh, Todd, how's he doing?" I haven't thought about him for a while, and I read the post and I was like, oh man, this totally speaks to me right now at this time in history. And you wrote an article, I think it's titled Zoom is Exhausting. Zoom Fatigue.
Yes.
Nine curated explanations. What? Why did you decide to write this blog post?
Well, as you may recall, I am a nerd for behavioral and decision science. And that's like, I don't read as many books anymore because I like to come to my own conclusions. So I'm just reading nerdy research pretty much all day. And I'm also listening to podcasts. And as I'm doing that, the term Zoom fatigue has been thrown around a million times over the last year, of course. But everybody's got a different understanding and explanation for what it is and why it happens. And so being the nerd that I am, I decided I'm just going to collect all of these reasons, and then I'm going to go do the research myself to see are they correct or not, or what is the proper explanation for these things. And I ended up with 9, and for the most part, the science and research back up the 9 that Zoom fatigue is real, and there's a scientific explanation for all of the reasons why it happens. And so, yeah, it was just like a for fun, nerdy article to pull it all together so that people who read it could sound smart to their friends.
I would love to walk through this list, Todd. And maybe there's actually some things that we can do to mitigate it. Or
yeah,
or or maybe at least just being conscious of it will make it a little easier to deal with. You up for that?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right. So what's the first one?
Oh, well, the first one is interesting because it's the title of it is Delays in Verbal Responses. But essentially what it's saying is that when we talk to somebody, like in a regular human-to-human environment, just the way that our brains are put together from a reptilian core, we cue in on how the person we're talking to is reacting, like their facial expressions, their eye movements, the way they breathe. And so when you're on video and you're doing that, there is, while you think there's no delay is impossible. I mean, there was a time I remember back when Skype was the cool, like what the cool kids were doing 10 years ago. There was sometimes, a second, 2 second delays. Now Zoom has got it down to the point where it's 150 milliseconds, but there's still a delay. And so our brain doesn't know how to wait even 150 milliseconds. And as a result, it's got to almost consciously process the fact that when I'm saying something to you and you're not reacting in the absolute real time, my brain's got to process a little bit more to make that connection and make sure that, like, if I say, hey, do I look fat in this shirt? And it takes you an extra second to respond, I may be offended.
And 150 milliseconds sounds fast, but it's really not. It's a tenth of a second.
Yeah. And there was a point where it was worse than that, and Zoom has actually downgraded their own video quality to be the best at it. So it's one of the things Zoom's really good at, is optimizing the audio and video as close to real time as they can possibly do it. And so they've degraded the video a tiny bit to make that, because when they were trying to do that in like 4D or whatever the latest term is, it was causing more of a delay. And so they've shrunk that time window a little bit.
So with this being true, that there is just a little bit of that gap in there, and I can't quite read exactly what the person I'm speaking with is saying, what can I do about that?
I think it's just a matter of being conscious of it. I think when we go through all of these, and there's this big pile of reasons that we experience Zoom fatigue, I think the core answer is going to be, we've got to be recognize that this is real and take our breaks. But a phone call doesn't require that, right? A phone call is not as exhausting because your brain is not automatically trying to cue in on all these visual things that are going on. And so I think it just comes down to being aware of it and trying to minimize the amount of time. I'll give you one point that came up Saturday night. My daughter's friend had her over, and so I went to go pick her up. When I got there, I sat down on the couch with this girl's parents for a little bit. And the dad is a teacher and is still teaching via Zoom. And he told me he is doing 300 minutes of Zoom a day. And I'm like, and he looks like he's aging like guacamole. Right? I mean, like, man, he just looks beat down, right? And so I think it's just a matter of us being aware of it for really all of these things.
I hate to diverge here, but you brought up something that's super interesting. You said that we don't have this issue with phone calls, and I agree. Yet at the same time, I just had somebody tell me last week, like, oh, I much prefer Zoom because then I can see what the person's doing. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I'm old. Okay, I am old, and I've done a lot of sales on phone calls, and I think they're very intimate.
Well, let's bounce around with these 9. Because what you just brought up is actually number 4.
Okay.
And number 4 is this idea of lack of nonverbal cues. And so one of the things, so the person that brought that up to you, apparently they at least want some nonverbal cues, like some visual cues when they're talking to you. But keep in mind this, our brain is only about 2 to 3% of our total body weight, but it uses about 20 to 25% of our energy. And so anything that is causing more, I guess the car term is the RPMs, or the more energy use of your brain, is over time going to exhaust you if it's not natural. And so one of the things that we do when we're sitting in a conference room or we're having a conversation face to face with somebody is that we are assessing the posture and the attention of the person. Um, that all of that's used to prepare our response adaptively for use in the way we reciprocate in the conversation. Like fidgeting, inhaling quickly as a reaction to something that I just said, or again,
What?
exactly like that sort of thing. A lot of people like to use that because it informs their responses and the way they reciprocate. Now the problem is though, on a Zoom, our brain wants that, but for the most part, you're only looking at them from the shoulders up, right? Like, unless you're going full body, how are you going to get the full effect of the the exhalations and the fidgeting going on and what they're doing with their hands? I could be pretty good at staring at the camera and doing something with my hands, and you'd have no idea.
I know. So the thing about a phone call is there's no expectation of these nonverbal cues. So
Well,
your
our
brain
brain
just
doesn't.
kind
Exactly.
right, your brain just turns it off. It's like when we're driving in a car, right? And your partner's next to you, your eyes are on the road. You're not looking at them, but you could be having a very deep conversation.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, the way our brains pay attention to things is one of because our brain requires shortcuts just to function. Like imagine if we had to make a decision, like every decision had to be done consciously. Imagine if you're playing frisbee in the park and somebody's throwing a frisbee at you, but you have to be aware of everything around it. Like your brain hones right in on that frisbee coming at you, and there could be, bears wrestling next to you, and your brain wouldn't see it. Because it takes the shortcuts to be able to focus on the thing coming at you. However, there is a reptilian core that if there's a snake next to you, you're probably going to let that frisbee hit you in the face because your brain is going to see it before you consciously see it, and you're going to start running.
Right.
So it's
right.
there's so much interesting stuff with this and the way the brain prioritizes, makes maps, and tries to maintain efficiency. And a lot of these things that Zoom does causes it to have to exude a lot more energy.
What's another explanation on this list that you'd want to bring up?
Yeah, so why don't we go back to number 2? And number 2 is this idea of resolving conversational interruptions. And this one's a pretty simple one, and you've probably experienced it. But and actually number 2 and number 5 are very similar. So let's tackle both of those together. It's taking turns. Resolving conversational interruptions is the process that it is required that if you're on a call with 10 people and 8 of you have something to say, how do you resolve that? It becomes a lot more energy, like process intrusive, where if there's 8 of us that want to talk at the same time, how do you resolve that? That all of a sudden there's 5 people and you're trying to figure out, all right, who should be talking, and like, should I be talking? And then everybody stops for a couple of seconds.
Yeah, are we running a round robin algorithm here, or are we not? Or
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And those things are much easier to take care of face to face, and they're actually easier to take care of in a phone conversation. On Zoom, it's harder because we're trying to see, there's a little bit of a delay, and we're trying to give the floor to people when it's hard. Like you're not. Let's go when you think about number 5, like matching it up with number 5, which is just taking turns. One of the things that happens when you're in a conference room and there's 10 people in the conference room is it's pretty easy to know who's going to speak next because they're either leaning forward, they're inhaling, maybe they've pushed their notebook away. They're making, as you're talking, they're like all of a sudden their head comes up and they're making a direct gaze at you. You know that they've got something to say, right? In the Zoom world, it was funny. I did a session for 50 people at a consulting firm yesterday. And it was funny that the way I knew that somebody wanted to speak is that they would take themselves off mute. But again, I could only see like 15 people at a time on the screen. And like that's the one signal we have that somebody is going to be speaking next. But just the process of taking turns and understanding who's next is an exhaustive effort for the brain to try to figure out. And then when that happens, the resolution, like I said in number 2, becomes a more energy incumbent type of situation as well.
I totally see this. I'm on this one call every 2 weeks where there's probably 10 people on it. It goes for 2 hours. I am just worn out because I don't know when to jump in or when not to jump in, and whose turn is it exactly?
Yeah.
And I feel like there's this order of things you should do it, but not everybody agrees with me. So it's like, oh, so complex.
and you'll see in some of these larger groups that people don't even want to talk. Like they'd rather just hide in the corner because they know that, getting out there and speaking, they've got to interrupt. It's like it's easier to hide in a Zoom conversation. Yeah. So let's go to the third one, because I think the third one is a great capture of all of these things. And number 3 is, again, what makes us tired and creates this Zoom fatigue is there is no such thing as actual eye contact on Zoom. When you're looking at the camera, the person on the other end of the phone or the other end of the Zoom thinks you're making eye contact with me. It's but you're not, because you're looking at the camera, obviously. And when you're actually looking at the person's face on Zoom, the person on the other end thinks their brain is processing that you're looking under them. The bottom line is, even in a one-on-one Zoom conversation, it is impossible to ascertain eye contact because there is no direct eye contact. And then let's get in a group. Your brain is trying to figure out who's looking at what. And in a Zoom call, there is no way to know what anybody's looking at. It's impossible. Like, you can't, if there's 10 people on a call, there's no way for you to accurately, with like pure definitiveness, what everybody is looking at. It's impossible.
In fact, it's almost, you see some people that they're clearly looking at their second screen, right? They're not even looking at, or they might be watching it, but it's on the second, but the camera's on the second screen.
Yeah.
Or that's very disconcerting. I was on a call, gosh, when was that? Just Friday. And the person was looking at me the entire time. At least they thought. But I only saw the side of their head because the way their camera was set. It was like,
and even when you're trying to do it right, like when I'm doing a virtual keynote, I'm looking at the camera because I want people to feel like I'm looking at them, but I'm not looking at anybody. I'm looking at a little green dot on my laptop. And so I'm trying to create that and make it a comfortable experience for the audience. But again, because our brains are driven to use eye movements and those types of things to ascertain people's reactions to things, if we cannot truly make eye contact, which again is physically impossible in the Zoom environment, then our brain is requiring more processing power to understand what's going on in the conversation.
Yeah. So interesting. Okay, what's another one?
All right, so number 6 is a pretty obvious one, but it's just the reduced physical activity. The fact that, that way it's kind of a Captain Obvious one, but it has been backed up by, studies. This study that I'd found that was in a sports medicine magazine, it just talked about this idea that, obviously physical activity is correlated with a approximate 40% reduction in fatigue. So that's the data point. If that turns out to be the case and you're spending days sitting in one room doing all of your meetings, you're not commuting to work. You're not even moving from conference room to conference room in between meetings. You might be walking from your office to the bathroom, which is the next door over, and that's the extent of your physical activity for a day. So, that's just Zoom fatigue in its purest form as it relates to physical fatigue. Again, physical activity is correlated with an approximate 40% reduction in fatigue. And if we're just sitting in our office staring at our screens all day, that's a reduction in physical activity, which correlates directly with a reduction in or an increase in fatigue.
I love it if I can get somebody to say, hey, would you guys be okay if we did a phone call? Sure. Because for decades, Todd, I've been in this office, talking to customers and prospecting and all kinds of stuff on the telephone, walking in circles, pacing up and down, putting a little bit, chipping a little bit,
Yeah.
and totally present to the moment of the phone call.
Well, Pat, if I'm being honest, I am doing that exact same thing right now. So as we're talking, I am pacing around my office because it helps me, though. It's not only a physical activity thing, but the movement helps me to enunciate better and have some more passion with the topics that we're talking about too. So that's also something that that's not one of the 9 here, but just the enunciation that is associated with a phone call and the physical activity for me just standing up becomes more powerful.
I'm wondering if that's why, you know Clubhouse, right? Have you heard of Clubhouse?
Yeah, yep.
I wonder if that's why it's hit so powerful, is because it's not this.
Yeah, it's there's pros and cons to Clubhouse. I think that might be one of the pros, and the idea that like I was involved in a Clubhouse conversation. I had an hour drive last Thursday, and so I just popped into a room, and the next thing you know, I'm engaged in this conversation, real time, and it was kind of cool. It's like a interactive podcast, and the fact that I don't have to be on video allows me to participate in more circumstances. So I think
of it as a conference call. It's like a conference call.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's definitely just like that. I think the downside to Clubhouse, again, separate conversation, is I think people are rushing to it, which is meaning there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and a lot of those cooks can't cook. So there's a little bit of that.
And there's too many people thinking there's a gold rush, and you better get in it if you want to make money. And I'm like, and me personally, the rooms that I'm in have nothing to do with money.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
I don't need to buy your online class through your Clubhouse. Anyway, what's another one?
All right,
we got 1 more to go or 2 more to go?
We've got 3 more to go, but these next 2 are my favorite. These ones really smack me in the face. So it's number 7, and it's what I call looking in the mirror. But the point being is, imagine if you on and off all day in like 20, 30, 60-minute increments, you had to look at yourself in the mirror. You know, when you look at yourself in the mirror, it requires a cognitive load because you're constantly assessing everything about yourself, right? Like, you know, how do we look? Do we appear credible, approachable, professional? When we do a Zoom and our camera's on, our brain can't help to notice that. And as a result, we're also, you know, doing that same thing. Do we appear credible? Do I look all right? Is my signal working okay? Does my background look okay? Do I look like an idiot? Being in a constant state of looking in the mirror directs your attention, and it's distracting, it's arousing, it's disconcerting, and at its core, it just requires more energy for you to block out. So that, like when I'm giving a talk and I notice myself in there, I can't help but notice that. And again, that distraction and arousing that comes from looking at yourself in the mirror and making that assessment of how you look just requires more cognitive energy.
Yeah. Where's my hair? How's my hair look, by the way?
That's right. I don't see you anymore, but I think the word that came to mind was dreamy. I think it was.
Yeah, your $20 will be in the mail.
All right, cool. I'll look for it.
All right. Next.
So that one's a big one. The next one is one that I found really interesting, and it's this idea of, you know, when you are having a conversation with somebody in a room, you just know naturally how far to stand away from that person. And, you know, there's Seinfeld episodes with the close talker and, like, you know, and because it's so uncomfortable. But our brain is basically doing a constant subconscious measurement of how far away we are. And there's a comfort that we get from being on the right. Like when you go to Starbucks pre-pandemic, you just knew how far to stand behind the person in front of you. Now it's 6 feet, of course, but your brain just knows that naturally. Now in a Zoom call, our brain is trying to assess how far the person is away from us. This one was deep. I thought this was super interesting, but it's these ideas of what's called preferred interpersonal spaces, proxemics and parapersonal space, meaning I can't tell if we're on a video together how close or far away from me you are. And our brain wants to know that because we're trying to assess and get to a comfortable spot. If you get really close up to the camera, your brain can't really tell, like, is that person actually close to me? Like, should I be weirded out? Are they really far away? Should I get closer? So your brain is doing this constant calculation around this idea of parapersonal space and trying to get to a comfort level around the preference of how far I want that person away from me in a visual environment.
They used to have conversations about this and how in different societies people had different senses of what their personal space was. Like Americans require more space than they do in other countries.
Huh. That's interesting.
So I totally get this, right? So if you're not really clear, are they that distance away that I need to be? Which these days is 6 feet, right? 2 meters.
Right. Yeah.
or are they too close? Yeah, I could see how that could generate fatigue.
Yeah, and it's a super subconscious thing that I believe green screens were exacerbating. Meaning that when somebody's using a green screen, it is really tough for your brain to assess how far the person is away. Now, if they have an open environment, they got pictures or books, our brain is actually able to do the calculation based on its understanding of how big the pictures are, how big the book should be, or the lamp, or whatever it happens to be. So that actually eases it a little bit. When you have a green screen of like the Golden Gate Bridge, our brain has no idea what's going on. Like, it's having a real hard time subconsciously assessing the parapersonal and proximity.
And and you got 7 people, all with weird backgrounds.
Yeah, exactly. Your brain's freaking out.
Like it's like puzzles. It's trying to. Okay, so there's one more.
Yeah, this is the last one, and this is the title of this one. I call it satiation, which is leading to loneliness. Which is just this idea that, like anything else, you become satiated when you've had enough of something. Now, imagine that teacher that I spoke with on Saturday night who just got done the day before doing 300 minutes of Zoom classroom activities during a day, 5 days in a row. And then he wants to get together with family. The last thing on earth he wants to do is stare at another screen. Like, your brain just doesn't want to do it. It becomes a detriment. Like, you know what? As much as I want to hang out with my family, doing it over Zoom, I've had enough. And as a result, we're finding that this remote environment, even with Zoom, is creating more loneliness issues to the point of almost being an epidemic from what I'm seeing. But loneliness is exhausting. And as a result, because we're not making those personal connections as much, because we don't want to do more Zoom calls, loneliness is actually growing in its pervasiveness around society right now. So we've got to get to a point where we can get face to face again.
This is you're bringing this up at a good time, because a lot of people are doing like a 1-year recap on how's the pandemic going, because it's been about a year since the lockdowns first started, at least here in Illinois. There's been a lot of conversation for the last year of like, wow, people know how to work from home, and they really appreciate having the freedom and all that kind of stuff. But what I've been listening to lately in the last month or two is that people are so lonely. They're so hungry to get out and touch people and shake hands and to grasp and to get into a big pile and dance to the music. I'm really wondering that maybe this is not going to be as strong, this whole virtual meeting is not going to be as strong as people are saying. That once people get out there and realize what it's like being with people in a room, that it's just going to be orgasmic.
Yeah, it's not only that, but when you're alone, and so this probably could have been the 10th one. And I've done some research on this piece, but if you think back a million years ago, let's say you're part of a pack. You're part of a pack. As long as you're a part of a pack, you feel secure, because essentially all you have to do is be faster than the slowest person in your pack, right? To survive.
Right. Faster than, I don't have to be faster than the bear. I just got to be faster than you, Todd.
Exactly. That's like that. And your brain subconsciously knows that. So you feel a sense of security, and your survival mechanism eases down a little bit. In a work environment, there's two things that are going on. Number one is when you're home alone, even if you're doing all these Zoom calls all day, your survival mechanism still kicked up a little bit because, in a work environment, your brain needs to know that other people have your back. And even in a Zoom environment, the survival mechanism kicks up a little bit. So point number two there is the question, do you have a best friend at work? Now, if we asked that question a year ago, what percentage of people would say yes versus today? I would argue that people don't have those connections like they did. They don't have that much of a connection to other people at work because it's just not the same. It can't be. And they don't have as much of a connection to the work and the company itself. And I wonder when things start to open up, whether we're going to see a lot more turnover because people aren't as wed to the companies that they're working with.
Yep. Yeah. I love this conversation because it's not what people have been saying.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much good to the virtual, man. I'm like, not having to commute is a beautiful thing. You gain a couple hours a day back to your day. That's awesome. And that helps with the exhaustion. But on the other hand, there are some downsides. So we're going to have to find balance. The other piece of that I want people to think about is if, let's say, you create a hybrid environment when everybody comes back. So I'm going to have some people work here in the office if they want. And if they want to work remote, they can do that too. So, all right, you've got two different groups of people, some in the office, some remote. What happens at promotion time? It is going to require real cognitive effort and focus to not do the out of sight, out of mind as it comes to promoting people. Meaning, if you decide that you choose for remote work full time, is that actually going to stunt your career path because you're not there? An executive is likely to promote the people that they see every day and they interact with every day over somebody who happens to be in an office in Omaha, Nebraska, that we happen to hire during the pandemic that we've never actually met.
That's a very real thing. I've seen that. I mean, in the sales profession, you see that a lot because a lot of people are remote workers because they've got a territory that's out in the boondocks, right?
Yep.
I've seen that. That's just a very human thing, That's just a very human thing to be in right. You and I are in a conversation, outside, out in the hallway after the meeting, and you bring something up, and you go, "Oh, I can go work on that. I'll go work on that, Todd." And then you go, "Hey, that bad guy, he's quick to volunteer," and you're going to remember that in March when the performance review comes around.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And we're seeing that really in the sales environment too. One of the things that I talk about a lot right now is this idea that consensus selling has always been hard, right? Like enterprise sellers always go, "Oh yeah, it's hard. I got to get all these people together, build consensus." But consensus buying is not only harder because as a buyer, you're only doing it once or twice a year, maybe, and the solution I'm buying maybe once in my lifetime. But now that all of the buyers are remote, consensus buying has gotten infinitely harder for exactly what you just said. That every consensus activity that a buyer is trying to do to gather people up to be able to make a purchase is a formal activity instead of running into somebody in the hallway or getting coffee in the kitchen or in the parking lot or the bathroom or wherever that happens. That's all gone. And so some of those types of things, if you're in a work environment where you've got to make purchases and build consensus, you're going to want to be in the office with these people.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so much. I mean, obviously, we've had a year to think about it.
Yeah. Companies are an organism.
Yes.
And companies are a process and we're a process. And that's in constant motion. It's constant movement. And if we're siloed out in these little places, these little remote areas of our homes, other companies are going to learn that that's their advantage, is the fact that we're all working together, that we're not remote. And they're going to eat other companies' lunch.
Yep. I think so. And like when you think about in a sales environment too, that I've heard people claim that, hey, sales has changed forever, meaning you're not going to need outside salespeople anymore. I don't believe it. Because
I don't believe it.
One of your competitors is going on site and you're not, and you start losing because of that, is the minute you start getting outside salespeople getting on planes and going out and seeing customers again.
I'm going on a sales call Friday.
Nice.
I was shocked. The lady's like, well, you're going to be close by. Could you stop by? I'm like, okay. No one else has been wanting that lately.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, for me, I just speak and teach, and I've been doing it all virtual. And I just signed my first contract to do a keynote in November in Florida. And I can't wait. Like, I can't wait to start getting in front of people again.
I can't wait to see you.
It's going to be great.
Before we leave, what's this thing? You're a history. You've become quite the history buff on selling lately.
Yeah, I've always had that kind of tucked down. But I had a book from 1947 that I just thought was amazing. It was called The 5 Great Rules of Selling by Percy Whiting. But in it, he would refer to other books from the 1930s. I would go read those that would refer to ones in the 20s, to the 10s, I've got a huge collection now, about 29 books, and then a number of old magazines on sales for anywhere from about 1880 to 1960s. The core of them, though, are between 1905 and 1925. And so it's just become a fascinating hobby for me to read up on the way that they thought about sales back then. And what I found is a couple of things. Number one, that if I took about 85% of the content, if I literally just cut and pasted it into a LinkedIn post, people would love it and have no idea that it's 110 years old. However, there's about 15% of the stuff I read that I'm like, what? Like, really? You guys, somebody thought that was a good idea? But I love it. Like, I've got all digital versions of Salesmanship magazine from 1904 through 1907. And that's just amazing. I can't put that down. I just think it's fascinating to read all of these experts, and nothing today is new.
I saw one of those in one of your posts. I Googled it, and one of those magazine sheets came up, one of the pages that had been photographed.
Yep.
It was fascinating. It
is awesome.
This sounds like an awesome episode. Nobody else may like this. I would love to talk about this someday.
I have a million things that we can talk about with that. And I've got a book here from 1916. It's called The Art and Science of Selling. And I mean, I wish people could smell the book. Like, it smells like history. I've got some physical ones here that are amazing. A lot of it is digital, but man, we could talk about talking about phrenology, which is the study of looking at somebody's head structure to determine how you should position your solutions.
You're supposed to read bumps on people's heads, right?
Exactly. Like, there's stuff like that. There's things about chemistry, meaning there's a chemist that was talking about how the two sales reps doing the exact same thing with the same skill set, but one of theirs has a degraded ductless gland system. They're going to struggle. And so, like, this whole piece about ductless glands, I'm like, what the hell are they talking about? But apparently that's the endocrine glands. But there's so much fascinating stuff. I've uncovered a woman who I believe to be the pioneer of women in sales. Her name's Lucinda Prince. I've written a lot about her recently because it's an amazing story. So yeah, we could go on and on about sales history.
I'm a huge history buff. Usually I'm reading about ancient Rome.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, this would be great stuff. Todd, thank you very much for being here on Sales Babble. So if people want to find your book, Transparency Sale, they would find it where?
Yeah, I'm hard not to find now, which is, I guess I'm blessed by that. But the Transparency Sale is available on Amazon or anywhere you buy books. And I also, if you want to spend it's about the same now because Amazon's kind of overcharging, but maybe it's like $1.50 more. Go to my website, transparencysale.com, buy it there, and then write in how you want me to autograph it, and I'll sign it any way you want if you want to buy direct.
Awesome. If people wanted to have you be the keynote at their next event, where would they find you?
Transparencysale.com is probably the easiest place, but I'm all over LinkedIn too. You can reach out to me directly through there too.
Awesome. Todd, thank you very much for babbling here on Sales Babble. This is not, and because we turned the video off, I don't feel fatigued whatsoever.
Me neither. I'm ready to go.
Take care.
All right, buddy. Thank you for having me. It's so good to catch up with you again.
Like I said, folks, the quality of that interview was not of the highest regard. But how about the conversation? How interesting that is. And I'm very excited to have Todd back on the podcast to talk about sales history. Maybe we can do that this summer. To find links to him and to find links to his book, The Transparency Sale, you can go to the website at www.salesbabble.com, and you can find all the links there, as well as links to all past episodes that we've been talking about and the past interview that we had on his book, The Transparency Sale. Please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast to make sure you never miss one. I know this ran long, so I'm not going to go much longer than this. Until next Tuesday, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.